Well, hello everybody, and welcome to episode number 18 of Cardboard Time. This is Arwen, and Justin is not with me today. We actually have both been very busy. I have been recovering from surgery, and Justin has been busy with some events in his life as well. So I thought that I'd just do a short solo episode to kind of check in and continue the continuity of trying to release an episode every 2 weeks, because I do have some things to talk about. I wanted to start off with the beer of the day, and this was not something that I've had recently, but since it is Pride Month, I did want to talk about the Elysian Glitter is Pride Ale. I had it a little while ago. It's a cream ale with a hint of berries, which really isn't too bad. It was pretty easy to drink. I gave it a 3.5. It was decent, but I wouldn't necessarily call it exceptional. I wouldn't turn it down if offered, but it's not going to be something that I really go out of my way to seek. And again, with a lot of my purchases, it dealt more with the can and the fact that they were also donating to charity as part of the campaign for the release. So that's something that I thought was very timely. Checking the shelf of shame, I am at 169, what is a net change of 0. I did have 6 new additions to the collection, but I did get 6 games played. So the new games in my collection are Gorinto, Tiny Towns, Destinies, Lucky Luau, Composition, and Arkham Horror, the card game. And I did get all of those games played, and 4 of them I will talk about on this episode, except for Lucky Luau, and I haven't played that. I did pick it up from a Kickstarter. It is from a local designer who we've had a lot of interaction with, Jeff Boltz. We've gone to multiple playtest events where he's been, so we felt like supporting him, and I'm interested to get this card game out. I also played Composition, but I'm kind of waiting on something to talk about that. But I did play it solo, and I'm liking it so far, just as kind of a preliminary review. The other game that I did get to the table to round out the 6 I played was Food Chain Magnate, and this was a solo variant that I found on Board Game Geek. I never imagined that I'd enjoy playing a game that revolved around an organization chart, but the action selection that provides was absolutely brilliant. I had such a fun time trying to build that out and try to, optimize my turns. A very unique and interesting way of handling that action selection. It's a very intimidating game to get into. A lot of Splotter Spiels games tend to kind of have that reputation of being, very heavy and crunchy. But I did find that much like Feast for Odin, there's really only a few main paths or groups that the cards actually go down. So it definitely eases the game explanation where you can kind of group everything together, and depending on what you want to do, if it means hiring somebody or producing food or picking up a beverage, there's all sorts of cards that are grouped in that line. So it's a lot easier to explain that way. I don't necessarily understand if the strategy that I developed during the solo mode would actually work against a human player, but I definitely had a lot of fun developing it. I need to play this with human opponents. Once I do, I could definitely see this being one of my favorite games of the year. It's a fantastic game, and it definitely deserves the hype that's been surrounding it. So on to what I've been playing. Again, I want to talk about some solo games and solo modes that I've been playing as I've been recovering. I did have my surgery on a Monday, and then by Tuesday, I was, able to go and set up some simple things, and we'll talk about those now. The first one being Gorinto. This is a game that I got on the recommendation of Eric Gergatz at Got a Lot of Games. It's a 2021 release. And it's a tile collection game in which certain tiles and combinations will score points. Tiles around the perimeter of the game board will be selected to collect tiles inside of the game board when placed in its corresponding row or column. Each of the 5 colored tiles, when used, collects other tiles in a specific pattern. So that could be diagonal, vertical, horizontal, or even tiles that are below it. The more of a certain tile that you have in your collection, the better that action is that you'll be able to take to collect more tiles. So it's kind of a small engine building device that's going on. And the solo mode has a player controlled by tiles to interfere and to take tiles before you can, with its own objectives of what it will score most on. So as far as my thoughts on this one, the solo mode is very challenging, and you actively have to decide between messing with the solo, and I hate to call it a player, but it's kind of the solo device. You kind of want to mess around with its scoring and make sure that you help your own at the same time. Once it starts getting tiles, especially in the early rounds, it can really build its scoring engine up quite a bit. So you want to try to prevent it from taking those tiles that it wants as much as possible. It's a very engaging abstract game that really isn't terribly hard to pick up. I would maybe put it on a level above Azul, but not very high above that as far as complexity. Very nice variations in scoring conditions. There's a lot of them included in the box that really do keep the game fresh. I played quite a few playthroughs of this because I had it set up, and once I got it, I'm like, oh yeah, I definitely want to play this again and see what another scoring condition would bring. And it definitely changed the game up quite a bit, and my strategy was completely different between the two games. So I was happy to see that. It was originally a Kickstarter game. I did pick up the Kickstarter edition for $40. I felt that it was well worth it. I have not played with the Joker tiles that were included. Just haven't gotten around to it, and I've been enjoying the base game enough that I haven't felt the need to include those as well. I do have a minor gripe with the game. The tiles do tend to stick a lot to one another, so it can make it a bit hard to pick up tiles from the stack from each other and to also randomize them as well. You have them in this giant bag when you're trying to set up the board, and since they do stick to one another, you really have to actively break them apart and keep separating them, or else they will stick together and just make little clumps to each other. So that is a minor gripe that I do have. I wish they had increased the clearance a little bit between the two surfaces. My final judgment is that it does fit a similar space to a lot of other abstracts that I have, but it did feel different enough that I would consider there being room. That and the fact that you have the ability to play it solo, and it's an easy teach, are going to keep it around for a while. I do think that a lot of my friends in my play group will have a good time with this and enjoy it. So it's definitely something that I'm going to keep around for quite a bit. And that was Gorinto. Well, the next game that I got out, and this was also the day after my surgery, and I'm hoping that I played these games right and I wasn't just loopy from coming out of things, but was Tiny Towns. And this was a release from 2019. And in Tiny Towns, players are mayors of tiny towns in the forest in which woodland creatures have created a civilization away from predators. The towns are represented by a 4x4 grid, and in each turn, one player will choose a resource for all players to place in their town. When a player has completed a pattern with those resources, they will then remove the resources and place a corresponding building that matches the pattern in one of the spaces where the resources sat. The game ends when all players cannot place any more resources or construct any more buildings. Buildings are then evaluated for point scoring. Squares with no buildings on them are worth -1 victory point apiece, and the player with the most points wins. So the solo variant for this had cards designating resources instead of the player just choosing what resource to play. You did get a choice of 3 cards, and you would choose one for each round, and then you would replace that card with another. You would take that resource, place it, and you would just try to best your previous high score. So I know that's a mode that some solo players have some issues with, but I don't seem to mind it as much as others do. I did find that this was an engaging enough puzzle that I didn't have a problem with that. I loved all the different building combinations and interactions. So you have 6 different building types. And your own personal kind of monument. The buildings interacted with each other in different ways depending on how the setup came out. I found that really, really interesting. Trying to figure out, maximize the highest scoring interactions between those buildings definitely took a lot of thinking and brain power. The landscape was extremely tight, so oftentimes I found myself trying to balance the optimization puzzle that we just talked about with the flexibility that you needed to make sure that you didn't build yourself into a corner. You really needed to balance those two and provide yourself with a couple of different options just in case things didn't turn out the way that you wanted. There wasn't a terrible amount of detail when it came to theme with the tie-in with the woodland critters. This definitely felt like it could be an abstract game where you're just placing buildings and those buildings have scoring conditions. The woodland critter theme on it was just kind of icing on the cake, but I know that they do have expansions for the game already, and I think the Villagers expansion might take care of some of that as well. It was fine. I didn't really hate it. It just didn't feel like it was an overwhelming tie-in with the theme. So my final judgment on this was that it was a solid little solo puzzle with a lot of replayability. You have these 6 buildings and multiple different cards reference that basically wooden piece that you're going to be playing out on the board. So I really did like that. It's a really nice gateway level game, and it supports a wide variety of players. It does feel different enough from the other kind of optimize your tile and building placement to score the most points games in my collection that it's going to stick around and probably even expand as well in the coming months, because I could see this one coming out with my play group as well. So that was Tiny Towns. And the next game that I'd like to talk about is one that's certainly getting a lot of buzz around the internet these days, and that is Destinies, in a 2021 release, brand new. Each player in Destinies takes the role of a hero on a quest to fulfill their destiny. Players will win the game if they are the first to complete their destiny, of which they have at least 2, which lead to branching series of quests and storylines, depending on how you play the game. The game does use a unique skill check system in which leveling allows players to choose how to improve their hero, so they ultimately wind up with more successful interactions. The game works through an app which allows for seamless storytelling and use of items and character interactions. This game is definitely not one for those who don't like apps. I do think out of games that use apps and apps well, this is definitely one that uses the app to its advantage. It's probably one of the best app implementations of a game from a streamlining and ease of gameplay standpoint. Very few rules that come in the box, and most everything is kind of handled on the fly. You can explain a couple of rules up front, your items, basically how your character is set up, how your destinies work, and then you're off and running and exploring. So I really give Lucky Duck Games, who produced this game, a lot of credit coming up with this app and really optimizing it very well. The idea of a competitive adventure game also intrigued me, as well as the skill check system, and it's very difficult for me to kind of explain how that skill check system works, but basically you have 3 tracks with numbers. When you perform a skill check, you're going to roll a certain amount of dice, and if you use items, you do get more dice, or the possibility possibility to modify your dice rolls. And along that track, you're going to hit certain points that have a disc in them, and that disc corresponds to a success. So when you complete your roll, once it's resolved, you will go and you'll look on your track and you'll see how many discs are basically before that number or on that number as well. So say I've built my character that I roll a 12 and I look from 12 and before and I have 3 successes. So then I would put that number 3 into the app and then it would give me storyline or some sort of interaction on how that resolved. And when you're leveling up your character, you're basically moving those discs down the track. So you're having more successes at lower numbers, or you're basically trying to improve your character's interaction. So it's really up to you how you determine where those discs are on the track. I found that very interesting. The game does play extremely well solo, and there's 2 different modes in which you can play the game solo. You can use it in Challenger mode, which is a timed game, and the Explorer mode, which is more of a free roaming exploration, more exploring the storyline at your own pace. If you do complete things faster, chances are you're probably going to have some sort of better interaction at the end of the game or better outcome to your game. But the Challenger mode is definitely more of one of somebody that wants a win or lose condition as opposed to just kind of a story. As the story unfolds, the destinations where you're really meant to go on the board start to make more and more sense. And at the end of the first game, it's really kind of intuitive what you need to do and where you need to go. It just feels kind of natural, which again, I give Lucky Duck a lot of credit for doing that in the app. I think that integration, again, really does help this game out immensely. Exploration also feels rewarding and satisfying, and my personal nature of wanting to explore everything, I had that tendency in a lot of RPG games as a kid. I would always want to explore everything and go everywhere. That actually can sometimes work against you because you have limited amounts of options per turn, and you may wind up missing something. Not to give too many spoilers into the story, but things can happen where different options can disappear off of the board if you take too much time. I really like that. It did feel thematic, but I have to understand, yep, I need to go and do this now because that option may not be there on my next turn. Again, regarding the skill check progression, I really like that system. It gave me the choice of whether I'm working towards ensuring successes at lower numbers, or do I want to try to increase my probability for multiple successes. So trying to figure out what exactly I wanted to do with my character felt really good as well. All of these things wound up in a very easy to pick up package. I think this is one of the easiest to pick up adventure games that I've ever played. So definitely something if you want to get newer players to the table, as long as you can get them over the competitive nature of the game, this will feel easy to get to the table. I have heard of the complaints that the board state may heavily favor one player over another, and having played through this a couple of times solo, I can definitely see that being the case. So if one player's over on one side of the board and they have an interaction that unlocks something that another player might need, that player can just go and pick that up, and then this other player who did the work to unlock that over on the other side of the board is now just like, well, okay, I guess I'll go do something else. So I could definitely see that being the case, but I cannot confirm that for myself yet because I have not played the game with multiple players. So I definitely wouldn't mind playing this game with others, but this is a great way to spend some time exploring a world, diving into its narrative, and especially when you experience it through multiple characters over many playthroughs. This will be one that I definitely wind up playing the same scenario over and over again from multiple characters' viewpoints to see how they interact with the story as well. I have a feeling that there will be a little bit of an unfolding of the world, through those different viewpoints. So I'm kind of excited to get more out of this game. I think that for its price point, I believe the MSRP on it is $40. You get a lot of admittedly very small minis, but there's a lot of content and a lot of gameplay in that box for $40 when you compare it to some of the other larger adventure games that are out there, your Mansions of Madness, your Arkham Horror, your Eldritch Horror, those kinds of things. This provides a huge amount of value in the box, as long as you don't mind the app play. So that is Destinies. And speaking of Arkham Horror, the last game on my list of games I played solo was Arkham Horror, the card game that came out in 2016. And in Arkham Horror, players build a deck filled with cards, which are good and bad, to represent their character in a Lovecraftian universe. Cards act as resources and can be used for multiple different things as you explore the landscape around you. Campaigns go through a series of scenarios that have consequences as you progress from one scenario to the next. Randomness for skill checks is handled through a bag of chits that have various effects, both positive and negative. So instead of rolling dice, you're going to be reaching into a bag of chits and pulling one out to modify your stats to resolve that skill check. So I have to admit that I have not been one for collectible card games or competitive living card games in the past. It just has not been my thing. Magic the Gathering just has not been really something that I've gotten into. Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh, and the LCGs like Lord of the Rings and such just haven't really attracted my attention. But I kept seeing how much love the Arkham Horror card game was getting, and I did pick this up at a very, very good price for the base set, and the numerous awards that it's won really got me intrigued. It's standing on the Board Game Geek Top 100 had definitely gotten me intrigued as to what's this game all about. I've got to play it at some point, and I'm really glad that I did. I think the fact that it's cooperative, you can play it solo, and it provides a good experience really kind of drew me to check the game out. There's a ton of gameplay in the core set alone. It's definitely something that you can get multiple playthroughs out of. I called it deck building on my show notes, but it's really deck customization and sense of progression where your choices and results carry on from one scenario to another. And that's both good and bad, depending on the interactions that you have with different characters and the outcomes of your skill checks, choices you make. Again, I don't want to give spoilers, but there are multiple decision points where you will have to decide, do I want to take a risk and kind of stay in this game, or do I just want to leave with what I have and maybe accept a few negative consequences to try to mitigate some really, really bad things that might happen if I don't. So I really love that, kind of progression and that kind of storytelling where one thing will build off of another. And you get that a ton in this game. The game's really beginner friendly. I found that the core set provided a really good couple of starter decks. It came with 5 characters, and it also came with recommendations for starting decks for, I believe, 2 of them. So you can kind of get up to speed on what the game is, how it plays, what a typical deck will consist of. Once you pick up the game and you kind of play through it, once or twice, and you see how that character acts and how that character is built, and you see those cards, the ability to really customize your deck to best utilize and streamline your character really gets a lot easier. You can see the different types of cards that are there. You can see the different effects that are out there, and then you can really use those and customize your character's abilities. So I really give them credit for making that pretty easy for somebody who really has no experience with a living card game. So this game could get pretty dangerous for me, to be honest. There are some characters I'm already looking at that I'd like to play the game with, and I might pick up at least another scenario to play through. I've already played through the first one a couple of times and really, really, really enjoyed it. So this could get a little bit dangerous for spending some money, but that's what sales are for. I give Fantasy Flight a lot of credit for making something that is very easy for a beginner player to go and just kind of dive into, be able to progress their understanding as well. I will be replaying this again now that I understand how tight the timing is and how much of an advantage getting a lot of perks early on is. You can find yourself very easily hampered quite a bit by some bad decisions that you might make or some bad pulls out of that chip bag that you might have. But, you know, that's why you go and you play the game again. This will be sticking around and, again, will be likely expanding. I know that on my list I have at least 2 of these games that will be getting expanded and another one that probably will be as well. So at least I guess that doesn't grow my shelf of shame because I don't count expansions. Maybe I should. You know, maybe once I get my shelf of shame down to 0 someday, I'll start counting expansions, get those played finally. That was Arkham Horror, the card game. Well, and that's going to do it for us for this very short solo episode. Again, I did just want to check in with everybody and let you guys know kind of what was going on and provide some thoughts on some solo games so that we can get back into the multiplayer, you know, once life settles down a little bit more. I do have a lot of reviews coming up. As I mentioned on the last podcast, we have our little tiny local convention. And when I say local convention, I mean local to pretty much my house, Americon that I run over the 4th of July weekend every year. Looking forward to getting together with some friends I haven't seen in quite a while and some friends that I just want to play a lot of games with. So I'm hoping that I'm going to have a lot of games coming off of my shelf of shame. With that said, make sure to check out our Facebook page. Make sure to look at our Instagram and Twitter at cardboard_time. Check out our Board Game Geek podcast page. And any questions, suggestions, or ideas for discussion topics, email cardboardtime@gmail.com or get a hold of us on our social media. We actually just had another question come in that we will probably be talking about on the next episode. So keep those rolling in. We love to answer them. So as always, thanks again for listening, and we'll see you again in another 2 weeks for another episode of Cardboard Time.